Good evening, dear listeners, and a very warm welcome to each and every one of you, wherever you're tuning in from tonight, perhaps snug and cozy in bed, nestled in your favorite quiet corner at home, or maybe unwinding in some peaceful spot as the world outside quietly fades away. I'm truly delighted that you've chosen to join me here. Take a slow, deep breath in and let it out gently. Feel your shoulders soften and drop. Perhaps pull the blanket or covers up just a little higher and allow the day to softly slip away from you. The Harrington Manor was the perfect stage for tragedy. Elegant, refined, every guest playing their role in a December weekend of festive cheer. Then Sir Reginald Harrington was found dead in the snow-covered garden, his body stiff with cold, a vial of poison clutched in his frozen hand. The snow had fallen heavily that night, blanketing footprints and secrets alike. Police saw a simple suicide, driven by financial woes. But Hercule Poirot saw a performance. Someone in this theatre of wealth was playing a role. The role of innocent. The role of murderer. The curtain rises. Chapter 1. The stage is set. The grand drawing room of Harrington Manor shimmered beneath Art Deco chandeliers, their crystal prisms catching firelight and tinkling like polite, restrained applause. Heavy velvet curtains in deep burgundy framed tall leaded windows where thick snowflakes drifted lazily, transforming the dark December garden into an untouched white stage set. Inside, the air was rich with layered scents. The expensive bite of Cuban cigar smoke, the delicate sweetness of hothouse roses arranged in tall crystal vases, the warm polish of mahogany furniture, and the faint, comforting trace of wood smoke drifting from the massive open hearth. Hercule Poirot had arrived that very afternoon as an unexpected guest, invited at the last moment by Sir Reginald himself. Now, standing near the fire, he tilted his egg-shaped head slightly and allowed his green eyes to sweep over the assembled company with quiet, methodical interest. He touched his magnificent mustache thoughtfully, a small, precise gesture that betrayed nothing of the rapid calculations already turning behind those bright eyes. Sir Reginald Harrington, wealthy industrialist and genial host, had been discovered at first light by a gardener. His body lay half buried in fresh snow on the garden path, stiff and blue-lipped, one gloved hand still clutching an empty poison vial. A crumpled note in his pocket spoke of financial ruin and unbearable shame. Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard, summoned from London, had already pronounced it suicide. "Clear case, Poirot," he had said with a shrug. Man was ruined. Couldn't face it. Simple as that. But Poirot had merely smiled politely and murmured, "Mais non, mon ami. This is no simple exit stage left. This is murder, disguised most artfully as self-destruction. The stage is set. Let us watch the actors." The company had gathered in the drawing room that evening, drawn together by shock and unspoken curiosity. They moved like players taking their first positions under the lights. Lady Evelyn Harrington, the widow, entered first. She wore a midnight blue silk evening gown that rustled softly with every step, the fabric catching the firelight like liquid shadow. She dabbed delicately at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, shoulders trembling in what appeared to be perfect grief. Yet Poirot noted, silently, precisely, that the handkerchief remained quite dry. Edward Harrington, the only son and heir, stood beside the polished mahogany sideboard. Tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in dark tweed, he poured champagne into crystal flutes with steady hands. The cork had popped earlier with a sharp, festive sound that now felt jarringly out of place. Bubbles rose coldly in the glasses as he offered them around. Amelia Harrington, the younger daughter, hovered near the grand piano, her soft kid gloves twisted nervously in her lap. Every few moments she glanced toward the tall windows and the snow beyond, as though expecting to see her father's shape still standing there. A faint scent of lilies clung to her, mingling with the sharper perfume of fear. Mr. Victor Langford, Sir Reginald's long-time business partner, occupied the deep leather armchair nearest the fire. He drew slowly on a thick cigar, allowing the rich Cuban smoke to curl upward and blend with the furniture wax and rose scent. His face remained calm, almost too calm, loyalty performing its well-practiced role. Mrs. Ellis, the housekeeper of 20 years, moved quietly among them with a tray of hot coffee. its strong, continental aroma cut through the sweeter notes of liqueur and champagne. She wore rough tweed, crisp apron tied neatly, and arranged linen napkins with hands that betrayed no tremor. Yet her eyes flicked often toward the garden doors. Last came Miss Clara Beaumont, a glamorous guest and rising West End actress. She accepted a glass of icy champagne with a graceful inclination of her head. Chanel No. 5 drifted from her like expensive mist. Her laughter, when it came, tinkled like the chandelier overhead, bright, controlled, perhaps a fraction too bright for a house in mourning. Observe carefully, mon ami, this cast of characters has taken their marks. Lady Harrington plays grieving widow with technical precision, but watch her eyes, how they dart to the clock as it chimes the quarter hour. Edward pours champagne with the steadiness of a man who has rehearsed composure. Ask yourself, why does the dutiful son avoid looking at the garden? Poirot applied his director method to Lady Harrington first. The performance, she weeps, yes. The handkerchief dabs at the corners of the eyes. The shoulders shake in the appropriate rhythm of sorrow. The tell. But observe, the handkerchief remains perfectly dry. No mascara runs. No redness rims the eyes. The performance of grief is technically flawless. Too flawless. The psychology. I am reminded of the Styles affair, where a woman rehearsed her devastation so carefully, practicing sobs before mirrors, timing tears to arrive with witnesses, that even I, Hercule Poirot, was briefly deceived. She sprinkled water on her cheeks to mimic weeping, yet she forgot one essential truth. Genuine grief swells the eyelids, reddens the whites, betrays the body even when the face lies perfectly. The little grey cells understand this. The psychology beneath the performance never lies. The truth. Therefore, this lady knew of the death before the body was found. Her sorrow is costume, not emotion. You see it now, non? Already the mask begins to slip. The room hummed with subdued voices. Footsteps echoed softly on the cold marble hallway beyond. Rain began to tap against the window panes, mixing with the distant, melancholy notes Amelia coaxed from the piano. Poirot smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from his sleeve and made a small, expressive gesture with his neat hands. This one, Langford, plays loyal friend, yet resentment flickers in the tightening of his jaw when Sir Reginald's name is spoken. Did you catch it? The careful observer, and you are becoming careful, mon ami, will notice the way his cigar ash falls a fraction too soon. The fire crackled warmly, battling the chill seeping from the terrace doors. Champagne corks had popped earlier. Now empty glasses stood like silent witnesses. Truth requires no rehearsal, yet every gesture here felt scripted, polished, performed. Bravo, Miss Beaumont, but the sympathy rings just a touch hollow. We approach the opening scene. Have you already spotted the false note in this elegant drama? The stage was set. The actors had taken their places. Let the drama begin. Chapter 2. Enter the players. The following morning Poirot summoned the household to the drawing-room precisely at 9 o'clock. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed the hour with deep, measured strokes that seemed to echo through the entire manor like a director calling places. Please. Outside, fresh snow had fallen overnight, muffling the world. Inside, the air carried the strong, comforting aroma of continental coffee freshly brewed, mingling with lingering wood smoke from the rekindled fire and the faint polish of mahogany. Velvet curtains had been drawn back to let pale winter light filter across the parquet floor. Crystal glasses from the previous evening still stood on side tables, catching glints of weak sunlight. Poirot sat in a high-backed armchair like a director in his preferred seat, small hands resting neatly on the arms, green eyes alert and gleaming. Formal interviews began, each suspect called forward as though stepping into a spotlight for their solo scene. Lady Evelyn Harrington entered first. Her silk morning gown rustled softly. She carried the scent of expensive Worth perfume that drifted ahead of her like expensive fog. She seated herself opposite Poirot, hands folded in her lap, kid gloves smooth and immaculate. She spoke of her husband's recent melancholy, of late-night letters, of debts that had weighed upon him. Her voice remained steady, almost musical, lines well rehearsed. Observe this performance carefully, mon ami. Is it truth or carefully staged theatre? Her hands do not tremble. No moisture gathers at the corners of her eyes. Grief, when genuine, shakes the body even when the voice holds firm. Ask yourself, why does the grieving widow pour her own coffee so steadily? Next came Edward Harrington. He wore rough country tweed today, yet the cut remained expensive. He accepted black coffee from Mrs. Ellis's tray, the hot liquid steaming between them. He claimed he had retired early, heard nothing unusual, knew nothing of poison. But you watch with Poirot, none. You see how his fingers grip the saucer a fraction too tightly? The surface of the coffee barely ripples. A truly shocked son would spill at least one drop. Amelia Harrington followed. She sat on the edge of the velvet settee, twisting a soft linen napkin between her fingers until the fabric creased. The faint perfume of hothouse lilies clung to her hair. She spoke of her father's kindness, of how dearly she loved him, of how impossible it was to imagine him taking his own life. The mask slips, did you catch it just now? When she said impossible, her gaze flicked toward the tall windows and the snow-covered garden beyond. Why does innocence avoid looking at the place where death occurred? Mr. Victor Langford entered smoking his inevitable cigar. The rich Cuban smoke curled upward, blending with the coffee aroma and the furniture wax that gleamed on every surface. He played the part of the loyal, grieving partner to perfection. Deep voice, measured words, firm handshake offered even though none was requested. Too perfect. Too rehearsed. Truth stumbles occasionally. Lies flow with dangerous smoothness. The careful observer, and you are becoming careful, mon ami, will notice how the ash falls from his cigar a heartbeat too soon when Sir Reginald's name is mentioned. Mrs. Ellis came next. She wore her usual rough tweed skirt and crisp white apron. She carried the coffee tray with the steadiness of long habit. She denied hearing raised voices the previous night, denied seeing anyone leave the house after 11. Her answers were short, respectful, almost mechanical. Consider the psychology here. What role does a servant of 20 years need to play to protect herself? Devotion? Silence? Fear? Watch how her rough hands remain perfectly still on the tray, yet the tray itself trembles ever so slightly when she sets it down. Last arrived Miss Clara Beaumont. She swept in trailing Chanel No. 5, accepted a glass of chilled champagne instead of coffee, and offered a small, tragic smile. She performed the role of the shocked, innocent guest beautifully, eyes wide, voice soft with sympathy. A single tear allowed to glisten, but never fall. Ah, but you say, Poirot, he reads too much into small gestures. Bear with me a moment longer. This actress knows how to cry on cue. Yet observe, the tear remains suspended, never quite touching the cheek. A performance, yes, but one rehearsed for the footlights, not for a private drawing room in mourning. As the interviews progressed, small contradictions appeared like missed cues in a script. Edward claimed he had gone to bed at 10:30 and slept soundly. Yet Mrs. Ellis had seen a light burning in the billiard room until after midnight. Amelia mentioned receiving a letter from her father the previous week, then immediately said she must have been mistaken. Langford's alibi depended on a telephone call to London at 11:15, yet the snow had begun falling heavily by 10, and no footprints led from the house to the garden gate except the gardener's at dawn. The tension rises. Someone will break character soon. Poirot made no accusations, only observations, delivered with small, expressive gestures of his neat hands. He arranged the coffee cups on the low table into perfect symmetry while he listened. The fire crackled softly. Rain began tapping against the window panes once more, turning the snow outside into a glistening, treacherous sheet. Lady Harrington's story overlapped neatly with Mrs. Ellis's, yet the times differed by 7 crucial minutes. Langford spoke of business troubles with calm regret, yet his cigar ash trembled when debts were mentioned. Miss Beaumont's sympathy flowed like champagne, yet her eyes lingered too long on the silver photograph frame, showing Sir Reginald in younger, happier days. If you were hiding a secret hatred, mon ami, how would you perform innocence? Would you weep too much? Or too little? The interviews concluded as the grandfather clock struck noon. Doors closed softly behind the departing players. The scent of coffee and cigar smoke hung heavy in the warm air. Poirot adjusted his mustache with precision. a small smile touching his lips. Every actor had taken their mark. But who played truth and who played lies? Chapter 3. The first act. The investigation deepened after luncheon. Poirot led the way to the long library at the rear of the manor, a room lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes whose faint musty scent blended with fresh furniture wax and the lingering trace of Cuban cigar smoke from the previous evening. The crystal chandelier overhead tinkled gently whenever anyone moved too quickly. Outside, wind rattled the tall windows, sending fine snowflakes tapping against the glass like impatient stagehands. Poirot positioned himself near the massive fireplace, where logs crackled and spat warmth into the chill air. He had requested that certain documents, letters, ledgers, personal papers be brought here. Now they lay spread across the polished mahogany table like scattered props waiting to be read for meaning. Lady Harrington was called first. She entered trailing the soft rustle of silk and the delicate cloud of Worth perfume. When confronted with a bundle of letters revealing Sir Reginald's secret meetings with creditors, her performance of calm widowhood strained visibly. Her kid-gloved fingers touched the paper once, then withdrew as though burned. Observe, mon ami, this first act is where the facade begins to crack. The mask slips on Lady Harrington. Did you see how quickly she looked away when the word poison was spoken? Edward Harrington followed. He stood with arms folded across his tweed jacket, attempting to project the steady air. But when Poirot produced a bank statement showing large, unexplained withdrawals over the past 6 months, Edward's composure faltered. Greed, so carefully masked as filial concern, flickered briefly in his eyes. You are becoming a careful observer now. Notice how his jaw tightens, how he pours himself a second cup of hot coffee with hands that are no longer quite steady. Ask yourself, why does the grieving son avoid meeting Poirot's gaze when money is mentioned? Amelia was next. She sat on the edge of a velvet chair, twisting her linen napkin until the crisp fabric wrinkled beyond repair. Under gentle pressure she admitted, haltingly, to a secret romance her father had forbidden. A young man of no fortune, a poet no less. Love had been performing as polite indifference all weekend. Now the mask cracked and real feeling bled through. The mask slips again. Did you catch the sudden flush on her cheeks? This is no longer theatre. This is truth forcing its way onto the stage. Poirot then stepped outside onto the cold terrace, coat collar turned up against the biting wind. The garden lay silent under its white blanket. Sir Reginald's body had been removed, but the outline in the snow remained like a chalk mark on a stage floor. He crouched, green eyes narrowing, studying the placement of the poison vial still clutched in the photographs Inspector Japp had left behind. The vial had been pressed too neatly into frozen fingers, too deliberately positioned for a man dying in agony. Watch this performance of suicide carefully. Too theatrical, too arranged. Truth does not pose his victims so artfully. Back inside, Mrs. Ellis was summoned. The housekeeper stood rigid, rough tweed skirt brushing the parquet, apron starched to perfection. When Poirot quietly mentioned the overheard argument between Sir Reginald and Langford 2 nights earlier, her loyalty cracked like thin ice. She admitted, voice low, that words like betrayal and ruin had been shouted behind the study door. This performance was never going to hold under close scrutiny. Bravo for trying, but the strain shows. The tension rises toward the first real revelation. Poirot applied his director method once more, this time to the collective behavior he had observed so far. The performance, each player has wept, sighed, protested innocence in perfectly timed measures. The tell, yet observe, the tears are sparing, the protests too symmetrical, the alibis too conveniently overlapping. The psychology. I am reminded of the Ackroyd affair, where a trusted servant performed devotion while secretly nursing deep resentment. She polished silver with furious energy to distract from trembling hands, arranged flowers with precision to hide the chaos inside. But she made one fatal error. She spoke of the dead man in the present tense once, only once, but it was enough. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. Guilt manifests in tiny, uncontrollable slips. The little grey cells detect these discrepancies because psychology never lies, even when the mouth does. The truth. In this house, Several knew more than they admitted long before the body was found. Their grief is costume jewelry, shiny, but not genuine. You see it now, none. The first act is concluding, and already some masks have cracked beyond repair. Reflection. Brief. Humans wear masks because society applauds the performance of virtue. Grief must look a certain way. Loyalty must sound a certain note. But the strain of constant acting exhausts the soul. Fear of exposure, greed for inheritance, love twisted into secrecy, all drive the charade. Yet the body is an honest traitor. Dry eyes in supposed weeping, steady hands in feigned shock, a single bead of sweat on a cool brow. Truth requires no rehearsal. Lies demand endless practice, and practice eventually fails. Remember this, mon ami. Every actor forgets their lines in the end. When they do, the spotlight of truth finds them. Langford was questioned last. He drew deeply on his cigar, smoke culling like doubts around his head. His alibi, dinner in London, return by late train, sounded solid until Poirot produced a railway timetable and a single unused ticket stub found in Sir Reginald's desk. The partner's calm fractured. The ash from his cigar fell prematurely onto the polished table. Consider, if you were hiding both financial betrayal and personal resentment, how would you perform unshakable loyalty? Would your cigar tremble? The library grew quieter as afternoon light faded. The fire crackled lower, casting long shadows across the books. Rain began again, soft at first, then steady against the windows. Poirot arranged the scattered papers into neat piles with small, precise movements of his hands. The first act concluded. Some masks had cracked. Chapter 4. Rehearsed lines. Late afternoon light filtered weakly through the conservatory windows, turning the glass panes into pale mirrors streaked with melting snow. Inside, the air was thick with the warm, humid perfume of hothouse roses, deep crimson and ivory blooms nodding in their pots, mingled with the faint, bitter edge of strong coffee, still cooling in porcelain cups. The temperature inside contrasted sharply with the icy draught that slipped under the French doors leading to the terrace. One could feel the chill on one's ankles, even as the fire in the small grate crackled cheerfully. Poirot had chosen this glass-walled room deliberately. It felt like a stage within a stage, exposed, transparent, nowhere to hide. He stood near a wrought iron table, small hands arranging a cluster of crystal liqueur glasses into perfect symmetry while he waited. The suspects were summoned one by one, their footsteps echoing on the cold marble tiles before they stepped onto the warmer mosaic floor. Lady Harrington arrived first. Her silk afternoon dress rustled like dry leaves as she sat. Poirot placed before her the bundle of love letters, not hers, but those addressed to Sir Reginald from an unknown woman years earlier. The widow's performance of dignified sorrow cracked almost immediately. She attempted outrage. "How dare you?" But the pitch was too even, the indignation too perfectly timed. Watch this carefully, mon ami. Is this spontaneous fury or a rehearsed scene from an old melodrama? Too smooth, too controlled. Genuine anger spills over. It does not flow in neat paragraphs. She denied knowledge of any mistress, yet her gloved fingers left damp prints on the crystal glass she clutched. Poirot tilted his egg-shaped head and murmured, "The mask grows heavy, does it not?" Edward was next. He strode in with forced confidence, tweed jacket buttoned tightly as though armor. Poirot produced gambling chits, large sums lost at discreet clubs in London over the past year. The heir laughed once too loudly, then poured himself champagne from the ice bucket. The cork had already been removed. The pop had sounded earlier like a warning shot. You see the strain now. His hand is steady when he pours, but observe, the bubbles rise faster than usual because the glass trembles ever so slightly. Ask yourself, why does a man drowning in debt perform such calm when the noose tightens? Amelia entered quietly, almost shrinking into herself. Poirot spoke softly of the forbidden poet's suitor, produced a single letter the young man had written pleading for Amelia to run away. She attempted to play wounded innocence. Father would never understand, but her voice broke on the word never. Real tears appeared at last, not the single theatrical drop she had offered before. The mask is slipping badly here. Did you catch how her shoulders finally slumped? This is no longer an act. Love, when genuine, refuses to rehearse its pain. Victor Langford followed, cigar already lit, smoke culling like a question mark. Poirot laid out forged partnership documents, small alterations in figures that would have quietly transferred thousands to Langford upon Sir Reginald's death. The partner attempted bluster, preposterous, but his cigar ash dropped onto the table unheeded, a tiny betrayal. Bravo for the attempt at righteous anger, but unconvincing. The performance falters when the prop, the cigar, betrays the actor. The tension rises. The script is cracking at the seams. Mrs. Ellis was summoned last. She stood ramrod straight in her rough tweed and starched apron. Tray of fresh coffee balanced perfectly. Poirot spoke of the hidden bank book found in her room, modest savings far beyond a housekeeper's salary. She denied embezzlement at first, voice flat and dutiful. Then Poirot mentioned the overheard phrase, "After all these years, you owe me," shouted 2 nights before the murder. Pure. Tray wavered. One cup rattled against its saucer. The mask of perfect service fractured. Resentment, long rehearsed into silence, showed in the sudden tightening of the jaw. Consider the psychology. Mon ami. What role must a servant play for 20 years to survive? Loyalty? Obedience? Invisibility? When that role is challenged, the performance collapses fastest of all. Miss Clara Beaumont entered last, trailing Chanel like a signature. She attempted to charm, "Surely you don't suspect little me," and offered a brilliant actress's smile. Poirot produced theatre programs from 5 years earlier, one listing her under a different name, in a small provincial company that had performed a play featuring a very similar poisoning. Her laughter tinkered like the chandelier, too bright, too sudden. "Ah, bear with me. You think this is mere coincidence?" No. This actress has rehearsed every gesture, every tear, every line of innocence. But truth needs no lines. Lies demand endless repetition, and repetition breeds small errors. One by one the alibis were tested like fragile scripts. Lady Harrington's claim of being in her room all evening contradicted the parlourmaid's sighting of a shadow on the stairs at 11:30. Edward's story of reading in the library fell apart when no one recalled seeing the library lights burning after 10. Langford's London train ticket was never used. Station records confirmed it. Amelia's supposed early night was disproved by a half-finished letter to her poet found under her blotter, ink still wet at midnight. The sweet taste of liqueur Poirot had offered earlier now seemed cloying on the tongue. The revelations sharper than the champagne. Rain drummed harder against the glass roof. Wind moaned around the conservatory like an unsatisfied audience. Poirot made one final, expressive gesture with his small hands, as though pulling invisible strings. Rehearsed lines began to falter. The script was failing. Chapter 5. The mask slipped. Evening had fallen over Harrington Manor. The drawing-room, once bright with crystal and firelight, now felt shadowed and close. Heavy velvet curtains had been drawn against the night. Only the fire and a few low lamps illuminated the space. The air carried the mingled scents of dying roses, cooling cigar smoke, and the sharp bite of fresh champagne still open on the sideboard. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 8 slow, deliberate notes that seemed to mark the beginning of the final scene. Poirot had summoned every member of the household. They entered one by one, footsteps hesitant on the parquet, silk rustling, tweed brushing velvet, as though each knew this gathering would be different. He stood near the fireplace, small and precise, green eyes gleaming with quiet certainty. Tonight he would shine the spotlight directly on the heart of the performance. Miss Clara Beaumont was called forward first. She attempted her usual entrance, graceful, chin high, Chanel drifting like expensive mist. But the room felt smaller tonight, the exits farther away. Poirot spoke softly, almost kindly. "Miss Beaumont. Or should I say Miss Clara Beaumont Harrington?" The birth certificate was quite clear. Sir Reginald's daughter, born in secret, given away 28 years ago. You return not as a guest, but as an avenger. Her smile froze, then cracked. She laughed once, a bright, theatrical sound. Then the laughter died in her throat. Her hands, so steady before, began to tremble. The champagne glass she held tilted. A single drop fell onto the polished floor. Observe closely now, mon ami. The mask is slipping completely. Did you see how the fingers clenched? How the perfect posture suddenly sagged? This is no longer rehearsal. This is the moment the actor forgets every line. Poirot continued, voice calm but relentless. He produced the small silver locket she had worn every day. Inside, a faded photograph of a young woman holding an infant, the same woman whose portrait hung in the upstairs gallery. Sir Reginald's first wife, dead in childbirth, the child recorded as stillborn. But the child had lived, and Clara had grown up knowing the truth. You came here to perform the role of charming guest, Poirot said. You smiled, you sympathized, you offered help. Magnifique acting. But one gesture betrayed you. He held up the police photograph of the poison vial, still clutched in Sir Reginald's frozen hand. Clara's eyes locked on it. Unconsciously, her fingers reached out, then traced the shape of the vial in the air, the exact motion one makes when remembering how an object feels in the palm. The tell. That small, intimate gesture. A stranger does not caress a murder weapon with such familiarity. Only someone who placed it there does. Emotional breakdown followed swiftly. The bright actress vanished. Real tears, hot, messy, unstoppable, spilled down her cheeks. Mascara ran at last. Shoulders shook with genuine sobs, not rehearsed ones. She sank onto the velvet settee, hands covering her face. I hated him, she whispered. He abandoned me. Let my mother die alone while he built his empire. I wanted him to feel what I felt, betrayal, then nothing. Poirot applied his director method one final time. The performance, she played the shocked, helpful guest with flawless charm, wide eyes, soft voice, single glistening tear held in perfect suspension. To tell, but observe the way her fingers lingered on the photograph of the vial, tracing its outline as though it still rested in her hand. Too intimate, too personal. The psychology. I am reminded of the Blue Train affair, where a woman performed cool indifference towards stolen jewels while secretly burning with avarice. She rehearsed boredom in mirrors, practiced detached smiles, yet betrayed herself by touching the very gems she claimed to despise. Touch, the subconscious confession the mind cannot silence. Psychology teaches us that suppressed hate festers longest in those closest by blood. The wound is deepest when it comes from kin. The body remembers what the heart tries to bury. The truth. Therefore, Miss Beaumont poisoned her own father. She staged the suicide, placed the vial, wrote the note. Her performance was brilliant, until the spotlight of truth touched the one gesture she could not rehearse away. You see it now, non? The theatre has exposed the heart. The room was silent except for the crackle of the fire and the soft, uneven breathing of the others. Lady Harrington stared at Clara with something between horror and pity. Edward's face had gone grey. Greed suddenly seemed trivial beside this deeper wound. Amelia clutched her napkin so tightly the linen tore. Ask yourself, mon ami, if love had curdled into hate over decades, how would you perform detachment? Would you weep too soon? Or hold the tears until they could no longer be contained? Poirot made one small, expressive gesture with his neat hands, as though lowering a curtain on the act. The champagne in the glasses had gone flat. Its cold fizz was gone. The scent of roses had turned faintly sour in the warmth. Rain tapped insistently against the windows, a steady rhythm like fading applause. The mask had fallen. Beneath it, the true face at last. Chapter 6. Behind the curtain, night had deepened around Harrington Manor. The heavy velvet curtains in the study were drawn tight, shutting out the wind that moaned against the windows like an audience growing restless. Inside, the fire burned low, casting long, flickering shadows across leather-bound books and polished mahogany. The air held the lingering bite of Cuban cigar smoke, now stale, mixed with the faint sweetness of dying roses brought in from the conservatory and the warm, comforting trace of wood smoke. A single lamp burned on the desk, its light pooling over scattered papers like a single spotlight. Poirot had chosen this smaller, more intimate room for the next phase. No more grand drawing-room performances. Here, behind closed doors, the backstage secrets would be pulled into the light. Lady Harrington sat first, hands folded in her lap, kid gloves removed at last. Poirot placed before her a small packet of letters, passionate, unsigned, dated over the last 2 years. She did not deny them. The affair with Victor Langford had begun quietly, continued in secret meetings in London, and had grown desperate when Sir Reginald discovered it. Loyalty had masked passion. Passion had masked fear of ruin. Observe behind the curtain, mon ami, the first secret revealed. Did you see how her shoulders finally relaxed when the pretense of perfect widowhood fell away? Edward Harrington followed. He slumped into the chair, tweed jacket unbuttoned, face grey. Poirot produced the gambling ledgers, debts mounting to ruinous levels, promissory notes signed in desperation. The heir had begged his father for help only days before the murder. The refusal had been icy. Greed had performed as filial duty. Beneath it lay raw, burning resentment. You are careful now. Notice how his hands no longer tremble when the truth is spoken. Confession brings its own strange relief. Amelia entered next, eyes red from earlier tears. She spoke freely now of the poet's suitor, of letters hidden in the lining of her jewel case, of her father's threats to cut her off entirely. Love had masked fear. Fear had masked silent fury at being controlled. Yet she swore, voice breaking, that she could never have harmed him. The mask of the dutiful daughter lifts at last. Ask yourself, when love is forbidden, does it turn to hate or simply to escape? Victor Langford came in smoking, but the cigar remained unlit. Poirot laid out the altered partnership agreement, small, clever changes that would have transferred controlling interest to Langford upon Sir Reginald's death. The betrayal had been planned for months. Loyalty had been the longest-running performance of all. Bravo for the sustained act, but the curtain is drawn back now. The resentment that simmered for years is exposed. Mrs. Ellis stood last, apron removed, rough tweed skirt suddenly seeming too large on her thin frame. Poirot spoke of the hidden savings, not embezzled, but accumulated from small bequests Sir Reginald had promised and never paid. 20 years of invisible service, of overhearing every family secret, of swallowing every slight. Resentment had performed as perfect devotion. Devotion had masked quiet, patient hatred. Consider the psychology here. Mon ami. The servant sees everything, yet is seen by no one. What role must she play to survive? Silence. Obedience. Invisibility. When that role is questioned, the performance shatters fastest. Miss Clara Beaumont was recalled. She sat quietly now, no longer attempting charm. Poirot produced the final piece, a chemist's receipt, dated 3 weeks earlier, for the exact poison found in Sir Reginald's hand. She had purchased it under an assumed name in a small shop in Kensington. Revenge had been rehearsed for decades, since childhood stories of the father who abandoned her, since the day she learned her true name. Behind every curtain a secret. Behind every secret a motive. Poirot allowed a moment of silence. The fire crackled softly. Rain tapped against the window like fading applause. He arranged the papers into neat piles with small, precise movements. Reflection. In this theatre of crime, every mask hides not just deception, but survival. Humans perform because society demands roles. The perfect wife, the dutiful son, the loyal friend, the invisible servant, the charming stranger. Yet beneath the costume, motives churn, fear of poverty, greed for inheritance, love twisted by rejection, hate nursed in silence for decades. Why do we wear these masks so tightly? Because truth, once spoken, cannot be unspoken. Because exposure brings judgment, loss, shame, and yet the body betrays us still. The averted eye, the too steady hand, the bead of sweat on a cool brow. I recall the death on the Nile affair, where jealousy performed as friendship across moonlit decks. A woman smiled, toasted, laughed, yet her mask cracked in one unguarded glance of pure hate when the victim turned away. She had rehearsed every pleasantry, every gesture of concern, but psychology revealed her in the clenched jaw during champagne toasts, in the way her fingers tightened on the rail when no one watched. Universal truth. Deception isolates the soul. Truth, even painful truth, reconnects it. Motives, once dragged from backstage, lose their power to terrify. For you, mon ami, remember this. Every secret waits for its spotlight. When it shines, the performance ends, and something truer, however broken, steps forward. The study grew quieter. The lamp flickered once. Poirot touched his magnificent mustache thoughtfully, green eyes gleaming with satisfaction. The secrets had been pulled into the light. The motives stood naked. Behind every curtain, a secret. Behind every secret, a motive. Chapter 7. The Final Act. The drawing room of Harrington Manor had become a theatre in its truest sense. Every lamp was lit, every crystal prism of the chandelier sparkling like footlights. The heavy velvet curtains remained drawn against the winter night. Rain drummed steadily on the windows, a low, insistent rhythm like an orchestra tuning before the climax. The fire roared high now, throwing warm golden light across polished mahogany, silk gowns, tweed jackets, and the pale, strained faces of the assembled cast. The air was thick with the mingled scents of Cuban cigar smoke, dying hothouse roses, strong continental coffee gone cold in cups, and the faint metallic tang of champagne left too long open. Poirot stood in the center of the room, small, immaculate, commanding. He had arranged the chairs in a loose semicircle, like seats in the stalls facing the stage. Every suspect was present. Lady Harrington in midnight silk, Edward in rumpled tweed, Amelia twisting her linen napkin to threads, Victor Langford with an unlit cigar between rigid fingers, Mrs. Ellis standing stiffly at the edge in her rough tweed, and Clara Beaumont seated alone, eyes downcast, mascara tracks already dried on her cheeks. Poirot raised one neat hand. The room fell utterly silent except for the crackle of the fire and the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, voice clear and measured like a director addressing his company on opening night. You have each performed for Hercule Poirot. Some performances were truthful, some were not. Tonight we review them all. Let the final act begin. He turned first to Lady Harrington. Lady Harrington, you played the grieving widow with elegance and restraint. The dry handkerchief, the steady pour of champagne, the measured tierce, technically perfect. But grief, when genuine, is messy. It reddens the eyes, swells the lids, shakes the voice. Yours did none of these things. You knew of the death before the body was discovered. Relief performed as sorrow because the debts would now be erased. She bowed her head slightly. No protest left in her. Edward Harrington, you performed the shocked and dutiful son. Yet greed does not lie about alibis so clumsily. You claimed a walk in the snow, yet no footprints matched your shoes. You poured champagne with steady hands while your inheritance hung in the balance. The performance was convincing, until the gambling debts were laid bare. Edward exhaled sharply, shoulders dropping. Amelia, your role was the innocent, loving daughter. Love does not hide threatening letters in jewel cases or lie about the hour one retired. You performed fear for your forbidden romance. But innocence does not glance so often toward the garden where death occurred. Amelia's napkin tore completely. She let the pieces fall. Victor Langford, you acted the loyal business partner. Loyalty does not forge partnership documents or lie about train tickets never used. Resentment performed as friendship, until the altered figures told their own story. Langford's cigar finally dropped to the carpet. He made no move to retrieve it. M.R.S. Ellis, the devoted housekeeper of 20 years. Devotion does not eavesdrop on private arguments, then deny them. Resentment performed as service, until the hidden savings and overheard words of "you owe me" exposed the truth. Mrs. Ellis closed her eyes for a long moment. And so we come, Poirot said quietly, turning at last to Clara Beaumont, to our leading performer. Clara raised her head. No smile now. No charm. Miss Beaumont, you gave the most convincing performance of all. The shocked guest, the helpful actress, the single tear held in perfect suspension. Magnifique. You smiled, you sympathized, you offered comfort, but you made one small, fatal error. One moment when the mask slipped completely. He lifted the police photograph of the poison vial still clutched in Sir Reginald's frozen hand. You touched this image here, in this very room, tracing the shape of the vial with your fingers as though it still rested in your palm. A stranger does not caress a murder weapon with such unconscious intimacy. Only the hand that placed it there does. Clara's breath caught. A single, genuine sob escaped. You are his daughter, Poirot continued. Abandoned. Forgotten. Raised on stories of the father who let your mother die while he built his empire. You returned not as Clara Beaumont the actress, but as Clara Harrington the avenger. You poisoned the champagne he drank alone that night. You arranged the body in the snow. You wrote the suicide note. The performance was brilliant until psychology revealed what rehearsal could not hide. Poirot applied his director method one last time, voice rising like a final crescendo. The performance, every one of you played innocence in varying shades, some with tears, some with calm, some with outrage. To tell. Dry eyes in grief, steady hands in shock, a single finger tracing a vial it should never have known. The psychology. I recall the chocolate box affair, where familial hatred masked itself as duty. A relative poisoned with calm precision, rehearsed every gesture of concern, yet forgot that guilt leaves its mark. Insomnia reddened eyes, a tremor no amount of practice erases. Kinship strikes deepest. The wound is oldest and rawest. The body remembers betrayal even when the mind constructs the perfect lie. The truth. Miss Clara Beaumont Harrington is guilty. She is the murderer. The curtain falls. Silence held for 3 heartbeats. Then Clara spoke, voice small and broken at last. I wanted him to feel nothing, the way he left me feeling nothing. Poirot made one small, expressive gesture with his neat hands, as though lowering an invisible curtain. The fire snapped. Rain tapped the windows. The clock chimed the quarter hour. The spotlight had found its mark. The performance was over. The final act concluded. Only truth survived the curtain call. Chapter 8. Curtain call. The drawing room of Harrington Manor felt suddenly smaller after the revelation. The heavy velvet curtains remained closed, but the air had changed, thicker, heavier, as though the final applause had died away and left only silence and the faint smell of cooling ashes. The fire had burned low. Embers glowed dull red beneath a thin layer of white ash. The scents that once seemed luxurious, Cuban cigar smoke, dying hothouse roses, Chanel No. 5, strong continental coffee, now felt stale and cloying, like perfume left too long on a dressing table. Inspector Japp had arrived with 2 constables just after Poirot's final words. The heavy boots echoed on the parquet floor, breaking the spell of the performance. Handcuffs clicked softly, metallic, final. Clara Beaumont stood without resistance as they secured her wrists. Her face was pale, mascara tracks dried into faint black lines, but the frantic actress had gone. In her place stood a woman who looked, for the first time, simply tired. No one spoke for several long moments. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed the half-hour, slow, deliberate, like a stage manager calling, "Strike the set." Lady Harrington was the first to move. She rose from her chair with slow dignity, silk gown whispering against the velvet cushions. She crossed to Clara and, for one brief instant, placed a gloved hand on the younger woman's shoulder. No words passed between them, only a look. Part pity, part recognition of shared betrayal. Then she stepped back, face composed once more, though the mask of perfect widowhood had cracked forever. Edward Harrington remained seated, elbows on knees, head bowed. The heir who had once poured champagne with such steady arrogance now looked smaller, diminished. Greed, once the driving force of his performance, had collapsed under the weight of a deeper family wound. He did not look at Clara. He could not. Amelia stood near the grand piano, fingers still clutching the torn fragments of her linen napkin. She had wept earlier, real tears, not rehearsed ones. But now her eyes were dry and clear. She stepped forward and spoke quietly to the inspector. "She's my half-sister," she said. "I didn't know until tonight. Please, be gentle." The constable nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Amelia returned to her place by the piano, shoulders straighter than they had been all weekend. Victor Langford stubbed out the unlit cigar he had been rolling between his fingers. He looked at Poirot for a long moment, resentment gone, replaced by something closer to respect, or perhaps relief. The forged documents, the secret affair, the business betrayal, all of it seemed suddenly trivial beside the murder of a man who had once been his closest friend. He spoke only once, voice low. "I never wanted this." Poirot inclined his head slightly. No judgment, only acknowledgment. Mrs. Ellis had retreated to the edge of the room, back straight, apron still tied, though the night's performance was over. She watched the constables lead Clara away with an expression that held no triumph, only quiet exhaustion. 20 years of service, 20 years of swallowed resentment, 20 years of playing the invisible role. And now the curtain had fallen on all of them. She did not speak. She did not need to. The hidden bank book, the overheard arguments, the small promises never kept. They had already said everything. Outside, snow had begun again, soft and steady, covering the garden where Sir Reginald's body had lain. Footprints, policemen's boots, Clara's small shoes would soon be erased, just as the earlier tracks had been. The stage would be reset by morning, pristine and white once more. Poirot stood apart, watching the quiet transformations unfold. He touched his magnificent mustache thoughtfully, green eyes moving from face to face. No satisfaction in victory, only the calm certainty that comes when order is restored. Watch them now. Mon ami, the masks have been stripped away. No more performances. No more rehearsed lines. Only people, flawed and exposed, facing the consequences of their roles. Lady Harrington turned to Poirot at last. Her voice was soft, almost fragile. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing what we could not."
Poirot made a small, expressive gesture with his neat hands. "It is not I who sees, madame. It is truth that refuses to stay hidden behind the curtain." The constables moved toward the door. Clara paused on the threshold, looked back once at the room, the chandelier still sparkling, the fire dying, the velvet curtains heavy with secrets, and then she was gone. The front door closed with a soft, final click. Silence returned. Edward rose slowly, crossed to the sideboard, and poured himself a small measure of brandy instead of champagne. The liquid caught the firelight, amber and warm. He drank it in one swallow, then set the glass down with deliberate care. Amelia moved to her mother's side. They did not embrace. Such gestures had never been their way, but they stood close, shoulders almost touching. A beginning, perhaps. Victor Langford walked to the window and drew back one curtain just enough to look out at the falling snow. He spoke without turning. "I'll settle the accounts tomorrow. All of them. Honestly, this time." Mrs. Ellis gathered the empty coffee cups onto her tray. The china clinked softly, ordinary sounds in an extraordinary night. She glanced at Poirot. "Will you be staying, sir?" Poirot shook his head gently. "Non, madame. The performance is concluded. Poirot has no more scenes to direct." He arranged a few objects on the mantel, 2 crystal glasses, a silver photograph frame, into perfect symmetry. Then he drew himself up to his full, modest height. The room emptied slowly. Footsteps faded down the marble hallway. Doors closed softly behind departing figures. The fire settled into glowing coals. No applause followed this performance. Only justice. The curtain call came. No applause, only justice. Chapter 9. After the show. Morning light filtered weakly through the tall windows of Harrington Manor, pale and hesitant after the long December night. The heavy snow had stopped. What remained lay in soft, uneven drifts across the garden, already beginning to melt at the edges under a thin winter sun. Inside, the drawing room felt strangely empty. The velvet curtains had been drawn back, letting cool daylight spill across the parquet floor. The chandelier no longer sparkled. Its crystals hung dull, as though the performance had drained their brilliance. The fire had been allowed to die to gray ash. Only a faint warmth lingered in the air, mixed now with the clean scent of fresh coffee being brewed in the kitchen and the distant, comforting trace of wood smoke drifting down from the chimneys. The cast had dispersed, but not entirely. Some remained, some had left at first light, yet each carried the mark of the night's revelations, like an actor leaving the stage still wearing traces of heavy makeup. Lady Evelyn Harrington stood near the grand piano, fingers resting lightly on the closed lid. She wore a simple wool traveling dress today, no silk, no elaborate jewelry. The mask of elegant widowhood had been set aside. What remained was a woman quietly planning the next act of her life. She had already telephoned her solicitor in London. The debts would be settled, honestly this time. She intended to sell the manor, travel to the south of France for a season, perhaps longer. Grief, once performed, had become something quieter, more real. She looked toward the garden window and spoke softly, almost to herself. I shall miss the roses, but not the secrets they hid. Edward Harrington had packed a single valise. He stood in the hallway, coat already buttoned, waiting for the car that would take him to the station. The heir who once poured champagne with arrogant steadiness now carried himself with the careful posture of a man learning humility. The gambling debts had been confessed. Arrangements were being made to repay them gradually. He had written a letter to his father's creditors, short, honest, promising restitution. Greed had performed its final bow. What remained was the slow, unglamorous work of rebuilding. Amelia approached her brother before he left. She wore a plain tweed coat and soft kid gloves. No more twisting napkins, no more averted glances. She had spoken at length with her poet suitor by telephone that morning. He was coming to London the following week. There would be no more hiding letters, no more forbidden romance. Love, once masked by fear, now stepped forward unashamed. Be kind to yourself, Edward, she said quietly. We both have new roles to learn. He nodded once, throat tight, then embraced her briefly, awkwardly, but sincerely. The brother and sister who had barely spoken truth to each other now shared a moment of simple, unguarded connection. Victor Langford had already departed by an early train. Before leaving, he had left a sealed envelope on the hall table addressed to the family solicitor. Full disclosure of the altered partnership documents, voluntary transfer of his shares back to the estate, and a personal check covering the amounts quietly diverted. The loyal partner had shed his longest-running role. Resentment had been replaced by the uncomfortable freedom of honesty. He had spoken only once to Poirot before departing. I shall start again. Properly this time. Mrs. Ellis moved through the house with her usual brisk efficiency, but something had changed. The starched apron remained, yet she carried herself with lighter shoulders. The hidden savings, small, hard-earned, never stolen, would now be used openly. She had given notice. In 6 weeks she would retire to a small cottage near the coast, funded partly by a bequest Sir Reginald had finally remembered in his will. 20 years of invisible service had ended, not in bitterness, but in quiet dignity. She paused in the drawing-room doorway, looked at the empty chairs, and murmured to no one in particular, "The house will be quieter now." Miss Clara Beaumont was gone, taken to London under police escort at dawn. Yet her presence lingered in small ways. The silver locket left on the mantel, the faint trace of Chanel still hanging in the air near her former chair. Obsession had consumed her performance. Regret had begun to take its place. In the cells she now occupied, she would face trial, but also, perhaps, the first opportunity in her life to stop acting and simply be. Poirot stood near the French doors, watching the slow melt of snow in the garden. He had arranged the few remaining objects on the sideboard into perfect symmetry. 2 crystal glasses, a silver photograph frame, a single white rosebud salvaged from the conservatory. He touched his magnificent mustache thoughtfully, green eyes calm. Apply the director method one last time to this departing cast, mon ami. The performance. They had played their roles with varying skill, some brilliantly, some clumsily, all desperately. The tell, the dry eyes, the steady hands, the single finger tracing a violet should never have known. The psychology. I am reminded of the sad Cyprus case, where inheritance masked murder and love unraveled the deception. There, too, family secrets festered until truth forced them into the open. Psychology shows us that revelation, however painful, restores order. It allows the soul to breathe again. The truth, justice has been served, not with fanfare, but with quiet inevitability. Masks fall, roles end, and something truer begins. You see the piece that follows? None? The front door opened. A cold draft swept through the hall, carrying the clean scent of melting snow. Poirot drew himself up to his modest height and made one small, expressive gesture with his neat hands, as though signaling the end of the run. The theater emptied slowly, but the lessons lingered. Chapter 10. Poirot reviews the performance. Several weeks had passed since the curtain fell on Harrington Manor. Hercule Poirot sat in the familiar comfort of his small London apartment, the one overlooking the quiet street where snow no longer fell, but gray February rain tapped gently against the window panes. The room was warm, orderly, symmetrical, every object in its appointed place. A low fire crackled in the grate, sending the faint scent of wood smoke curling upward to mingle with the herbal steam rising from the cup of tisane on the small table beside his chair. He had arranged the cushions with precision, smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from the sleeve of his dressing gown, and now sat with legs neatly crossed, green eyes half closed in reflection. A small stack of newspapers lay on the side table, headlines already fading into yesterday's news. Miss Clara Beaumont Harrington had been charged. The trial would begin in spring. Lady Harrington had indeed departed for the Riviera, her letters to friends speaking of long walks and new beginnings. Edward had entered a quiet rehabilitation program for his debts and habits. Whispers suggested genuine change. Amelia had married her poet in a small registry office ceremony. No grand performance, only two people stepping quietly into truth. Victor Langford had dissolved the old partnership and started anew with scrupulous honesty. Mrs. Ellis now lived in her coastal cottage, tending a small garden of her own roses. Hothouse no longer, but hearty and free. Poirot sipped his tisane, allowing the warmth to settle. He touched his magnificent mustache thoughtfully and began to review the entire performance, not for evidence, but for the deeper lessons it offered about the human soul. Why do people perform rather than reveal truth? Because society is itself a vast theater, mon ami, demanding roles from every player. The wife must appear grieving even when relief floods her heart. The son must seem dutiful even as greed consumes him. The servant must remain invisible even after decades of silent witnessing. The abandoned child must smile and charm rather than scream the rage nursed since infancy. Masks are not worn from malice alone. They are worn from fear, fear of judgment, fear of loss, fear of the chaos that comes when illusion shatters. Guilt always betrays the actor. It cannot be rehearsed away. The body remembers. The dry eye and supposed weeping, the too steady hand in feigned shock, the single unconscious gesture that traces a poison vial as though it were a lover's face. These are not accidents. They are confessions the mind cannot suppress. The little gray cells understand this. The psychology of revelation is mercilessly precise. Society imposes its costumes. Elegance for the wealthy, loyalty for the partner, devotion for the servant, innocence for the daughter. Yet beneath every costume, turbulent motives churn, greed masked as inheritance rights, love twisted into obsession, resentment polished into perfect service, hate rehearsed into sympathetic tears. The strain of constant performance exhausts the soul. Truth requires no effort. It simply is. Lies demand endless vigilance, and vigilance eventually fails. I am reminded of the murder on the Links affair, where a man performed poverty while secretly hoarding wealth. He wore threadbare suits, spoke of hardship, rehearsed humility in every gesture, yet betrayed himself in the smallest details. The way he lit a fine cigar with casual elegance, the polish on shoes too perfect for a pauper, the instinctive reach for a silver cigarette case he claimed not to own. Like Clara Beaumont tracing the vial, his body confessed what his mouth denied. Snow-covered evidence in that case, too, footprints erased by weather, motives buried under layers of performance. Yet truth thawed them both. The psychology is the same. Suppressed truth festers. emerges in tiny, uncontrollable slips. Revelation brings catharsis. Masks fall, roles end, and something raw, sometimes broken, sometimes freer, steps forward. In Harrington Manor, the same pattern played out. Clara's obsession masked as charm, Lady Harrington's relief masked as grief, Edward's greed masked as duty. Each performance was brilliant in its way until the spotlight of truth touched the one gesture, the one contradiction, the one physical tell that no rehearsal could hide. And when the masks fell, what remained was not destruction, but possibility. Travel for one, reform for another, marriage for a third, honest work for a fourth, quiet retirement for the last. Why does truth ultimately triumph over performance? Because performance is fragile. Truth is enduring. Lies require constant energy to sustain. Truth needs only to exist. The body, the little inconsistencies, the psychology of human nature, all conspire against the lie. Order and method prevail. The theater of crime fascinates because it mirrors life itself. We all play roles. We all wear masks. We all forget our lines eventually. For you, mon ami, the theatrical wisdom is simple yet profound. Watch life stage carefully. Observe the small tells, the averted eye, the too perfect smile, the bead of sweat on a calm brow. Every actor forgets their lines in the end. When they do, truth steps forward, not always gently, but always inevitably. Empathy follows understanding. Forgiveness sometimes follows revelation. We are all, in our way, performers, and all, in our way, seeking the courage to drop the mask. Poirot set the empty tisane cup down with a soft clink. He arranged it exactly parallel to the saucer, then leaned back in his chair, eyes gleaming with quiet satisfaction. Until the next theater of crime, Mise Amis. Poirot will be watching.